I'm Bryony Albery. Just want to start by saying how inspired I am by Eddie and Amanda. I do homelessness support work, so I hear a lot of stories about substance misuse and similar issues every day, and actually I'm really too used to listening to them. But hearing you guys tell your stories like that, wow. And it's amazing to hear your personality and your creativity coming through. And when the stage isn't for a communication strategy, although they're important, it's just about your voice and your creativity. And I guess that's a little bit of why I'm here today. Because I do homelessness support work, but I also write a bit of poetry. I've got a slightly different perspective to share and a different way of sharing it. And I'm going to do a bit of poetry for you today. But I want to start by asking you a question that I've been thinking about since I started doing the poetry, and that's how often do we listen to the people who are trying to deliver those services? How often do we make space for those people to talk about what it's like trying to make the system work? So for me, my job and my part of the puzzle is that I quite often listen, as I said, to people whose lives are unraveling and listening to their stories. So my work is a lot about eviction prevention. So people will come to me with a court hearing and their landlord's asking for their eviction. Sometimes they'll only come in a couple of days before the court hearing, and sometimes it's like the second court hearing. And other times there's no court action, actually. Their landlord is threatening violence. And you've got to leave. And they are scared. And it's even worse if they're related to their landlord or if there's other debts as well, which for a lot of them there are. And so my job, I'm not a solicitor and I'm not legally trained, but I do know how to get alongside people. And I do know enough of the system to be able to help people engage with that. So I'll quite often help people fill out forms, asking the court for a stay of eviction. I'll maybe get in touch with the landlord and ask to make an arrangement before we go to court, or I'll refer them to a debt agency to try and get some of that sorted. What I often end up doing is going to court with people, because it is terrifying. I had a client in the last few weeks who actually threw up 6 or 7 times on the way to court. And to her credit, she still showed up, but she was that scared of losing her home. And so my job is often sitting and watching people while they're trying to engage with a system that is actually there for their benefit. And so that's what this first poem that I want to share with you is about. It's about eviction. I didn't write it that long ago, and I hope you like it. In the last 2 weeks, I stopped 2 evictions. Both were family homes, so that's 5 less homeless adults and 4 less homeless kids. In the first house, 2 parents trapped in fear, newly married just this year with 3 kids. And in the second, 3 daughters clinging onto one mum, keeping up the job while holding down the fort. Both the cases went to court. Now, I've seen it before, so I can say for sure it is terrifying. Would you know that a suspension of possession, a stay of an eviction, and postponement of possession are all a little different, but they're all on one form. There's one form for them all, the N244 form, and that's actually quite small. But if no one told you what you should do, if you were depressed and dyslexic, how would you find your way through? Because court is a land of evidenced assertions, a kingdom of official requests. The place is neat, and while some walls are white, most of them are washed with white, with the kind of curtailed creativity that says, you're different just like everyone else. Because the nuances of you are filtered out through deep layers of paperwork, until the black and white bedrock of evidence is reached, and then in your place a pile of paperwork speaks. And it's this narrow narrative, the thinnest thread of who you are, which is offered up to them, those who are in charge. And in the balance hangs your family home, the only place your children have known. Thank you. So how did I get from being like an overbusy support worker to standing on this stage with the added label of poet, which frankly I'm still getting used to, although I did wear my favorite poet shoes and hat today. It started for me when I was on on Langkelly Chase's Systems Changes program. So it was a year ago. Picture this. A room full of domestic violence organizations, drug and alcohol agencies, homelessness, gypsy and traveler organizations, all represented, but not people from the tops of the trees, a bunch of us support workers from the Frontline. And we met together each month for 6 months, and it was really intense, but we got to do some stuff together which really mattered, and we're still working on those projects today. But on that program, I was challenged to have a go at blogging. And I've always loved writing, but I've never made time for it since like secondary school. So I carved out some time, which is pretty precious in my job. And I started having a go at drafting some stuff. And I shared that with some of the guys on the program, and they told me to write some more. And looking back on it, being given permission to have a go and the time was like huge. It was massive. That was the change. That was the important thing for me. And completely separately to that, at the same time, my friend and I discovered a poetry slam locally in Reading. And like when people hear the words poetry slam, they quite often think of rap battles. But I can tell you, I'm not that cool. Actually, it's a bunch of us in a cafe, and we read our poetry to each other, and there are judges, so you get points for your poetry, and then those points are added together, and you can win. So I had a go. And I got this blog about evictions, and I turned that into a poem, and wrote a couple more. And I won. And I've managed to maintain that strong 100% success rate by taking 6 months off and having another crack and winning again recently. So it turns out I'm a poet, and I didn't even realize. And since then, I've shared my poetry a bit more, and I've done that poem actually at work a couple of times at our events. And actually not so long ago, a volunteer who actually knows what I do very well came up to me, and he said that poem had caught him off guard, and that it helped him understand it in a way that he hadn't before. And he had like tears in his eyes. And there's been other times that I've shared my blogs or my poems with my friends, and after we've read it together, there's this like pause, this pregnant pause. Because poetry can communicate stuff that is impossible to say any other way. And for me, in my job, sometimes that's the only way I can explain what my job is actually like. So if we've got a story to share, it's worth sharing. If we can create space to have a go at being creative, that's important. But for a lot of frontline support workers like me, and including myself, actually another huge barrier and something that we are all terrified of is sharing our clients' stories and worried about our clients. And that's not because they're not resilient. I mean, we saw a lot of that today, hey. But what we're worried about is that those stories don't actually really feel like they're our stories to tell. They're our clients. They're certainly not ours to abuse, and that's something we've got to respect. And we fear that maybe our clients, when they're really at a low ebb, might go on the internet and discover a story has been posted by a charity that's supporting them that is chillingly familiar to their own. But the risk is that those same clients will roll in and out of services for years and years and never quite get it together, and then their story's never told. And while we advocate for them in that situation, what about the bigger picture? What about all the other people like them up and down the country with the same issues? And what if those stories never get told and those problems aren't fixed? And so I thought I'd better have a go, like I say. And something I discovered along the way, well, let me explain. So when I write, I try and sit somewhere I love, like an armchair or my friend's kitchen table, and I'll put it all down, literally, warts and all the details, everything about how I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and stuff about the client too. And that's okay, because that first draft is just for me. That's just mine, and only I will look at it. And it's really important for me to do that because my job is stressful, and actually it's a way for me to process what I've been through and what I'm doing. And then after that, I pare it down. And I take out all of my stuff, and I take out all my clients' identifying details and those things. And that's okay too, because then it stops being a story about that one client and starts being a story that speaks to many people. And somewhere in there is my story as well, and I get to tell it. And so it's really important, if we've got a story to share, to say it. And I just wonder as well how many other stories there are tucked away in the lives of very busy people that never get told. And so I think sharing stories is really important, and I think that's something we need to do, but it's not quite the whole picture because, okay, how does it feel when you are shouting and screaming about something and you know that no one is listening to you? We can't share our stories if we're not also listening. How can I expect to change the system I work in if I'm not listening to the people that are working to keep it the same? And I think a really perfect example of that is Brexit, actually, and everything that came after it. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Brexiteer or a Remainer to see it. What happens when people don't feel represented and when we don't make space to ask questions, to share our stories, and to say stuff that's unpopular, change our minds, and maybe be wrong? And so that's what this next poem I want to share with you is about. It's about Brexit. And if I'm honest, the working title was Show Me the Money, Nigel, but it has changed significantly in tone since then. So that woman in the office, the one that used to be a florist, it turns out she likes Boris, and now they don't respect her anymore. They say that she had a dream and chased it, but she's just got to face it. Her dream's a little racist. They don't respect her anymore. But that guy in Infotech, he got it in the neck for marking Remain with a check. They don't respect him anymore. They say that he signed that petition. Is he lacking so much vision he can't accept a clear decision? They don't respect him anymore. And me? I was a no-show at Bojo's battle bus. He came to cattle us, infect us with his battle lust. And yeah, I'm fussing, but it was basic them and using, a revival of tribal survival. But the battle bus wasn't just the one with big white lies painted on the side. It was also the one that ran from Newport to Quembran 4 days after Joe Cox died. Inside, a mother and her child, a little laughter, a little smile. And Mum, with her niqab on, spoke to her son in their native tongue until one man made known his wish that in the UK you should speak English. But a woman interjected and said, "We're in Wales, she's speaking Welsh, dickhead." But in a campaign of lies, even that wasn't true. Of all of us who liked it, few of us knew. There were no corroborative witnesses. It was just shared lots of times, 25,000 to be more precise. There wasn't even a bus replacement service that day. But what we all liked was what it had to say. That when we speak up for each other, we share our power. And that's why that story means so much. So let's keep that in mind and put the buses to one side and gather around a table. But don't come to it suited and booted and sleek, punctual, political, or bleak. We're here to rediscover our ties. Not the ones they tightened round your neck, the ones that starved you of breath. We saw your starched collar propping up your locked jaw. Breathe. There is space for you to speak, because these are the ties we forge together when we try to make things better. Thank you. So speaking and listening is really important. But also, I want to see change. Don't you all? We want to see stuff get better. And outside of my job, I find it really hard to know what that looks like. And I think a lot of other people do too. Like, when I hang out with my friends, we love talking about sci-fi and fantasy and books and films and the latest Marvel film. And we'll talk about, the plot lines that worked and the jokes that fall flat, and we'll talk about all of that. And quite often we'll then get on to the challenges that face our society. And we start off really impassioned and angry, but we fall flat because we don't know how to turn that into action and into change. And I think when I started my job, I kind of thought I might be like one of those characters or feel a bit like them in that, I'd start off with an ideal and I'd work really hard at it and it would take a long time and I'd have to invest in it, but eventually we'd achieve a thing and the credits would roll. What I found is a bit different. Plot lines are a little bit unpredictable. My jokes actually often fall flat. And the endings are often ambiguous. But from my job, I can see hundreds of volunteers turning up for their shifts. I know people that will turn up at our offices with food and duvets. I see our trustees working so hard. I see my colleagues and I see the other organizations that we collaborate with to make stuff happen. And so that's what this last poem that I want to share with you is about. It's called Dust Movement. Thank you so much for listening today. See a superhero film with some friends and leave your seat when the film ends. Go home in your car and lie in your bed with stories and fantastic things in your head. And as you lie there in the dark, allow warm gladness to fill your heart, that there are heroes to fight evil men, and that good will always win in the end. So on Monday morning, when the headlines scream and angry politicians fill the small screen, you simply note, while eating your oats, that using one's vote just makes you one of the masses, one speck in a pile that is massive, because the world is not a comic book, and this isn't the day when the whole world shook. There is no caped crusader standing out from the crowd that we can all gather around. But some specks or some flecks gathered together become motes, and from us motes maybe a dust movement can grow, and a growing dust movement is more, with other flecks and specks and spores. We could ruin photo opportunity grins with layers of lint, and then have a stint on Radio 4 and ruin some more interviews with allergies. Instead of fallacies, a powerful sneeze will take the front page by making allergies rage, so the polished, polite politicians are painfully aware of our position. Because the world is not a comic book, but this could be the day when the whole world shook, when with no caped crusader standing out from the crowd, we took inspiration from the dirt on the ground. Because the only heroes there are ones that bleed, and ones that cry, and ones that need to be allowed to be human, to be afraid and frightened of ruin. So, you aren't a bystander with a menial part. Join the millennial moat movement with your human heart. Thank you.